Welcome to the Lensrentals podcast. I'm Ryan Hill. This week for Halloween, we're going to tell you some gear horror stories. This is the worst stuff that's ever happened to our gear out in the field. I'm talking with Joey and Roger because over the years they've seen some truly terrifying things. Spider infestations, sensors fried by lasers, even bear attacks. So gather around the campfire, grab a flashlight, and listen if you dare.
Let me tell you, the creepiest thing I've heard out camping was this summer when we stopped at Devil's Tower. We could hear what sounded like a group of like laughing children off in the distance.
Coyotes?
Coyotes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That has happened to me camping, but it was Boy Scouts. It was just actual children that were running around in the woods.
Oh, no, this was coyotes for sure. We heard them like 3 times, woke me up, and I was like, what the fuck is that?
I got all that. I might leave it in. I'm going to go ahead and roll us into it in case I want to leave that in.
Okay.
Do it.
Roger, Joey, thank you for joining me. Happy spooky Halloween to you both.
Happy Halloween.
It's spooky season.
It's candy season.
That's actually a good spot to start. Before we get super into it, give me your favorite Halloween candies.
Milky Way.
Reese's Pumpkins.
I agree with Reese's Pumpkins. That's a correct answer.
Well.
All right. We have to get into the subject at hand. We were talking about gear horror stories today. This is the worst stuff that has ever happened to our gear while it was out on rentals. And before we start on the subject, I want to set the scene a little bit. So, Roger, Joey, you're not in a podcast studio, right? You're around a campfire.
I was told there'd be s'mores.
Yes. Yeah. We're around a campfire. We're having s'mores. We're in the woods.
Wait, is this the Midnight Society? Do I need to sprinkle the dust onto the fire?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It smells like incense out here. I have a nice apple cider in front of me. That part is real. I'm having a nice apple cider while we record.
Oh, that's cool.
We're passing the flashlight back and forth. We've got it under our faces. We're telling scary stories.
Right.
And I want to start with Roger. Tell us the scary story of our first gear horror story, the lens that came back with a fly in the middle of it.
Well, we've actually had 3 episodes of that horror story now.
What?
Yeah, there's been a fly there and 2 spiders.
I didn't know about the spiders. I put this on my outline because I remember the blog article about the fly. This has happened more than once.
It's been 3 times. Now, it's over 10 years, and how many thousands of rentals that must be. I mean, we're over 1 million rentals. But
Wait, so the lens swallowed the spider to get the fly?
it was different lenses, but maybe it was preventing the fly.
I don't know why it swallowed a fly.
Well, the lens didn't die.
A little quick clarification for anybody who hasn't read this blog article. What we're talking about is exactly what it sounds like. A lens came back from a rental with a fly in between 2 elements. Check out the blog article. We'll link to it. You can see pictures. It is a visible full fly.
The first time it happened, literally, I mean, the techs lost their mind, and what they were trying to do was take a picture of the fly using the lens, like they wanted to get an outline of it. Mm-hmm. And even our techs were going like, that's got to show up, and they were flabbergasted when it didn't. The only thing we could think of, that was actually not, it was a weather-sealed, quote-unquote, lens, but the back element had a gap. So if you took it off the camera, it was no longer weather sealed. So we think the fly might have flown in it when somebody set it down without a cap on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And the amazing thing about it was this was a zoom lens with like 17 elements, and it was 8 elements deep. This was not just like around the back of the lens.
Yeah, that guy got stuck.
That guy was way up in there. And of course he got smushed when somebody zoomed it.
Yeah, and we're not talking like, it's not like a house fly. It's like a gnat.
It was a good sized fly. The spiders were babies, and we don't know how they got in. Both those were, again, weather sealed lenses. They were decent, not infant spiders. And we learned that spiders are worse than flies because if you put a spider in a lens, he spins a web.
Oh no!
There's an actual web in there.
There was web stuff everywhere, and I'd read, like, when you're in high school science, and they go, a spider's web is stronger than steel. It's stickier than anything too.
Oh, yeah.
And in those cases, we literally had to take the lenses apart and clean every single element for hours to get all the web goo off of it.
How long did that take?
Well, you got a complete lens disassembly in all three cases. So you're talking about an hour to take it apart, an hour to put it together, and probably an hour to clean all the crap out of it.
All three were like salvageable?
Yeah, they're all salvaged. They all went back out and rented their usual lifespan. I mean, we have to take lenses apart and clean them every so often, so it's not unusual. It's just unusual what it was. But the amazing thing to me was the fly was larger than the spiders. It was a big fly. And we tried, it's like F-16 shots, thinking we could somehow get a picture of this spider, and never got anything except a little kind of blurry area or kind of decreased contrast area.
Yeah, I want to make a side note right here about that. Anytime you see dust in your lens, it's way smaller than a fly.
Yeah.
I guarantee you're not seeing it in your images. I guarantee it.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to get into. That surprised me most about the blog article, is that this thing is not really visible in photos unless you're like at f/16 at a particular focal length, like really shooting settings to show it specifically.
What we ended up showing in the blog is there you could see kind of a gray blobby area that really was a little darker and a little decreased contrast. You could notice it, but you would never would have guessed it was a fly.
Right.
It was just kind of a hard to see thing, and never could we like see an outline of the fly. But we did a thing years ago with lens dust because we like Joey said, you get these people, there's dust on every one of my images and I've never had this before. And it's probably because you stopped the lens down more or something else happened. But we were taking sticky notes and tearing off 3/8 inch size pieces and putting them all over the lens, trying to find them. You never could see them.
That is my absolute favorite blog post to send every customer that's ever complained to me about dust. It's the apocalypse of lens dust. We should totally link that one.
Yeah.
It's great.
But back to the original story, the spider one really, I think Aaron doesn't like spiders to start with. And when we first got into that one, and there was a web that became obvious when you started looking at it, we have some 1,000-watt light spotlights we can shine and see stuff that mere mortals can't see. And when he saw the web in there, he was convinced that spider had laid eggs.
This is getting into like body horror territory.
It really was. And, it's like Alien was going to come out of this lens. And so he was in a rush to get it apart and cleaned because he was afraid if we left it, it was going to like infect the rest of our lenses or something.
I'm sure he's had that exact nightmare before.
He
taking apart lenses all day, every day.
Oh yeah, that it's not related, but every so often we see a lens that comes back with a fungus in it, and you want to see some people freak out. I mean,
oh man,
it's like get it outside, put it in UV light, throw it away, don't let it get near anything else.
Yeah.
It's one of the few times I see really seen everything, hardcore experienced repair techs lose their mind as if they think there's some fungus in the lens.
I want to get a quick, technical explanation, not to veer us too far away from fun, spooky Halloween, but why is it optically that a full fly or a Post-it note could be between two elements in your lens and it not be visible in your image?
I mean, you could think of it like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Roger, you can think of it like projecting a shadow from like a diffuse light source versus a hard light source. If you had a light out in your yard or whatever, it's a spotlight, and you put your hand close to it, you're going to get a little diminished light, but you're not going to see like a hard edge of your hand until you get it closer to the ground. And it has more to do with like parallel rays versus diverging rays. Is that right?
Well, the rays are being bent so much.
Yeah.
My easiest thing, if you want to visualize it, is there's certain diagrams you can find from optical stuff on the web that will show like all the light rays that come into a lens and go to this point source on the sensor, and they all kind of fold, and every time they hit a different lens element, and at the bottom line there's a point on the sensor. If you trace those rays out anywhere besides the very back of the lens and block half of them, you're still getting tons of rays from the same point in the distance in the subject of your picture. So you may block with a fly, let's say a fourth, perhaps. I'm being real generous. It's probably more like a tenth of those light rays that come to that point on your sensor where your subject is. But 80% of the light's getting through. And that's why what we saw was an area that's kind of not quite as bright and maybe a little blurry gray, but that's what you see because 80% of the light rays from that point, let's say it's a tree in the distance, are still getting to the sensor.
Yeah, whereas if you're seeing sensor dust, those things are right on the sensor.
Right.
And as you stop down, the rays are coming in such a way that it's making that hard shadow right on the sensor.
Exactly.
Okay, so if people are seeing artifacts in their image, it's more than likely sensor dust, not lens dust.
Almost every time.
Yeah, 98% of the time. Occasionally, if it's on the very rear element and you're stopped down, especially when it's a mirrorless system where the distance from the back of the lens to the sensor is shorter, you might see something.
Yeah, and that's the only time I think I've ever seen it. And it's usually with either a ultra wide angle lens or an extreme telephoto lens.
Yeah, and a mirrorless system is a little more likely to show it. But the people who yell are usually yelling about the dust they see under their front element, and that's just not possibly going to be visible.
Ever. Never, ever, ever.
All right, well, moving on to our next horror story. I'm going to pass the flashlight from one person to another. The next one we're going to talk about is a bear attack. A Nikon D4 and I think 600 millimeter prime was attacked by a bear in the field with a wildlife photographer.
Yeah.
About 10 grand worth of gear.
Easily, yeah.
Oh, and a nice tripod was involved too.
Yeah, it was a really nice tripod. I think, if I remember right, the tripod and the camera survived?
The camera, the lens, and the tripod also. The tripod didn't need repair. The camera and the lens both had to be repaired.
Yeah, new mounts, right?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and in a position to, if you're not like driving or whatever, look this up on the blog because he was lucky to have two cameras on him. So he had to run away from one camera because it was approached by a bear, but had a second camera to take photos of this whole thing. So you can kind of see it.
Didn't he have like an ultra wide lens on the other camera?
Or a zoom lens or something.
Yeah, it must have been a zoom because he looks like he's from a safe distance, but they're pretty zoomed in. I bet it's like a 200 or something.
And the bear wasn't paying any attention to him. It just wanted to kill that camera and lens.
Oh, yeah.
It's impressive. It looks insane. And yeah, according to the blog article, at least, and I looked up the old repair tickets before we talked about this, it sounded like the only damage, at least to the camera, was a bent lens mount from it getting like toppled over with that massive lens on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the lens had a little more work than that, but both were easily repairable, which was the surprising thing.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to ask about that because the blog article doesn't mention what happened to the lens. Do you remember what, if any, damage there was in the lens itself?
It had I think the camera mount, the bayonet was bent, and I believe it cracked at one of the barrel mounts where it fell over because that was that's an older 600 f4.
Yeah, it was the G series.
Yeah, so it was the heavy type, and I think the barrel cracked. One interesting thing about that from the repair side is we see lenses broken in half, and people assume that's just a write-off, and that's usually not a bad repair, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as there's nothing like super broken about it.
Yeah, as long as the element's all saved, they just put a new barrel on it. It's okay. The one thing I remember about that story that I like, though, is I heard about this bear attack. And, of course, after years in the rental business, I'm pretty cynical, and I'm like, yeah, sure, right. And the guy's like, no, I've got pictures.
Yeah.
That was the best part. We were like, oh, this is real.
And I emailed him back. I was like, if you let us use the pictures for a blog post, there will be no charge for your repairs.
Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is they are pretty good pictures.
Yeah. And that was it. I was like, oh, I so want to write about this. I'll eat the repair. I want the article.
Do we remember where he was? Was he in Yellowstone?
Yellowstone, I believe.
He was in Yellowstone, yeah.
I just had a road trip out there like last month or two. The real lesson from this entire story is always pack bear spray.
Does that stuff work?
Yes, it works.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like pepper spray, but for bears. And the bear spray cans, they spray like 20, 30 feet or something like that. You get them right in the nose, they will leave you alone.
My only experience was an Alaskan wildlife thing, and the guide had the largest handgun I've ever seen strapped in this holster. And I was like, should I bring a gun too? And he goes, nah, if it's not like this, it's just going to aggravate him.
A handgun? That seems nuts.
It was like a 45 Magnum or something. Literally, this handgun had a barrel about a foot long.
Oh, geez.
It's like a Dirty Harry kind of gun.
I feel like if you're carrying a handgun for wildlife protection, your goal is more to impress tourists.
I was impressed. I make no bones about it. I was impressed.
When I was hiking around Glacier, I ran into exactly one person who had a gun on him. Like even the Rangers didn't. Most of the Rangers didn't have guns. They just had cans of bear spray on them.
I'll go with the Rangers on this one.
Yeah.
Joey, I know you don't do much wildlife photography, but has anything like this ever happened to you in the field? Any attacks?
Sure. It didn't involve any wildlife though. I actually did get shot at once. So a few years ago, I was doing a 365 project on old expired instant film. And I had a friend of mine. She lives kind of out in the county, or at the time she did. Her dad lived out in Tipton County. So we're in Shelby County here in Memphis. Tipton County is like the county. It's the country. And she was like, yeah, come on out. You should come out and do a photo out here. I was like, cool. I got this idea. I was thinking about doing like this kind of axe murderer scene, like cool silhouette and backlighting. I got an axe and you'll be like hiding behind a tree or something. And she's like, that sounds awesome. My dad's got this huge backyard. We can do it tonight. It's like, cool. So I drove up there and it wasn't even that late. It was like maybe 8:00 or so. And I get all my gear and we're walking out into the woods. We're maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 feet from the back of the house, like squarely on her property though. And I got a flashlight out there and I'm setting up a light. I'm setting up a strobe out there, doing some test shots, trying to figure out, framing and all this. And we're just minding our own business. And we hear a gunshot go off and it's real close. And I kind of look at my friend. I was like, what was that? She goes, it's just the county. It's probably nothing. So we keep going. And then we hear another couple of gunshots. And we look over at her neighbor's back deck and we can see a guy. And we can kind of see like some like haze around him. And she goes, excuse me, sir, what are you doing? And he goes, your lights are waking up my dogs, waking me up. Like, fuck? And she's like, I'm not having this shit. You stay here. And I was like, I don't want to stay here. And she just runs off into the house. She comes back out of like a couple of minutes later. And she's like, I just called the cops on him. Come inside. And I was like, okay. So I just left all my stuff out there and we're in the house. Like maybe 10, 15 minutes later, the sheriffs show up and they come in. They're like, tell us what happened. We're like, well, we don't really know exactly what he was doing over there, but we're out here minding our own business, setting up a shot. I'm a photographer. This is her dad's land. Her dad's right here. And we just heard some gunshots and this guy was real mad at us. And we're not like, they're like, well, take us out to, where you were. So we walk them out there and they're like, yeah, you're squarely in the middle of the property. You're at least 30, 40 feet from the property line. This guy is on his back deck. All right, we're going to go talk to him. So they go talk to him and they're gone like 20, 30 minutes. They finally come back. They're like, okay, well, we have arrested him. We're going to take him to jail tonight. He was apparently shooting at you. So yeah, be careful. His wife mentioned something about sicking the dogs on you after we left. So if she retaliates, just let us know. And feel free to go about your business. We're like,
thank you for visiting Tipton County.
Yeah. I was like, all right. So, we sat there and talked about it for a little bit. It's like, well, I still have to make this photo tonight. I have to do one every night. Do you want to just go do this? She goes, I mean, might as well. He's gone. I don't think she's going to sick her dogs on us. So, and we're already set up, right? I was like, yeah, we're already set up. It's going to take like 5 minutes. And so we went out and we took the photo and it was great. And it was the only time I've ever felt in danger taking a photo.
That's insane. All right. We will take a quick break. We will be back with more gear horror stories. Listen if you dare.
If you only know Lensrentals from our yelling about cameras on the internet, there's more to the story. We're actually the largest online videography and photography equipment rental house in the entire world. Cameras, lenses, lights, audio, drones, just about anything. Here's how it works. Just go to lensrentals.com and tell us what you need and when you need it. We ship it straight to you in protective cases. You use it for whatever your heart desires, then ship it back to us with the included return label. Next time you need equipment for a shoot, head to lensrentals.com/podcast for a discount on your order. That's lensrentals.com/podcast.
Welcome back to the Lensrentals podcast. We're talking gear horror stories with Joey and Roger. This is the worst stuff that has ever happened to our gear in the field. And I'm passing the flashlight to you, Joey, around the campfire because I don't fully understand what this is. You mentioned bit flipping when we were planning this episode out, and I would like an explanation about I need this concept explained to me.
Okay, so there is an entire Radio Lab episode about this, and it's really, really wonderful.
We'll link to that in the show notes. We'll link to a better podcast in the show notes so you guys can check that out.
It's fascinating. It's a fascinating podcast, edge of your seat kind of stuff. Okay, so we now live in the digital age. Everything's ones and zeros, right? They discovered this phenomenon. There was an online voting thing. Or not online, it was like a computerized voting thing. This was in the Netherlands, I think. And it was for something stupid like a TV show call-in, like America's Got Talent kind of thing or whatever. And they got all the votes in, and this one girl won in a landslide, but her vote total was 4,096. And if you know anything about computers and bits and bytes and stuff, that number should seem interesting.
Yeah.
If you think of a kilobyte is 124 bytes, that's times 4 is 4,096, right? Well, what they figured out was bit flipping occurs when universal background radiation, cosmic rays, gamma rays, something like that, hits an electronic device and causes one or two ones or zeros to flip the other way to a 0 or a 1. And that can cause things like someone winning an electronic voting thing in a landslide. That was one bit flipped and caused it to be 4,096 votes. So my job here, I do a lot of quality control stuff, a lot of incoming repair inspection stuff. I am basically always testing gear that someone claimed messed up on them, failed them in some way, broke in some way. And whenever I can't recreate the problem they had, and I can't figure out a reasonable explanation why they had that problem, I always resort to bit flipping.
So it's getting into like chaos theory territory. We're talking about like the drop of water on Laura Dern's hand.
Right. And they think maybe this happens a lot, but most of the time it doesn't result in anything.
Can you give me any like examples of problems you've had with our gear that you can only attribute to this?
Let me think here. Things like autofocus stopped working. But then, I get it. I'm using the same lenses that they were using, same camera they were using, and everything's working fine. Or some weird screen glitch, things like that. Just like weird random things that should never have messed up, and I can't confirm it at all.
Would this be the kind of thing like when we have a problem camera and just reinstall the firmware and it works again?
Yes,
Okay.
that kind of stuff too.
Okay.
So this is half superstition.
Ghost in the machine. That's what it is.
Stuff. Yes.
Yeah, little gremlins. And at its heart is the deepest horror of all, an existential horror that the universe is at its heart chaos.
Right. And I mean, okay, so let's go back to that very first example. This is 2020. We're using electronic voting machines. I mean, who's to say the universe isn't just going to mess up the election this year? Who knows?
I don't think the universe is the fast horse.
Oh, we'll see.
Oh well.
All right, we're gonna pass the flashlight again from one person to another, and it's time to close out our gear horror stories with eclipse damage. Roger, can you talk about how often this happens and to what degree it really messes things up badly?
Well, eclipses don't happen that often, but the big eclipse, was it 2 years ago now, or is it 3?
2017, okay. I believe.
So pushing 3. We were prepared to have 1 million cameras with sensor damage. That's what we really expected. Mm-hmm. And we did everything we could for like 6 months. Everyone who rented for that time span with weeks on either side, got a letter in their rental box about eclipses and how to do it. We did everything we could. We still didn't know we were going to get killed. What happened, I think, was we had maybe one camera that actually had sensor damage. We had a bunch of really expensive telephoto lenses that had their apertures melted, though.
Yeah.
And it was spectacular. I mean, these things came in with apertures that looked like flower petals. They were all melted up and curled up and curlicues. And it was from people believing that, okay, well, instead of putting a sun filter on my lens on the front of it, I'll close the aperture down to f16 and that'll work. It worked for the camera, but all that telephoto sunlight was magnified on the aperture for their 2-minute exposure and just melted the crap out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember, Joe, was it 4 or 5 super telephoto? I mean, we're talking expensive lenses that we ended up.
Yeah, it was several. We had some super telephoto primes, and we had a few of those Sigma Tamron 150 to 600s too.
Yeah, which I'm sure was zoomed out to 600.
Mm-hmm.
But people just don't realize, well, that light that goes in the front of the lens, closing down the aperture, it still gets really hot. But, what's kind of related, what we see, I think, more than the, eclipses, which are pretty rare and predictable, is the folks who decide to go out at night and shoot either concerts or at nightclubs with lots of lasers.
Yeah, lasers will fry your sensor real fast.
How many of those have you seen, Joey?
Maybe over the years, like a dozen.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool because it's always usually a pinpoint laser hit the sensor and suddenly you've got this, black dot on every image because the sensor's been fried.
Yeah, I will say it's almost always mirrorless.
Yeah, and I think it's wide angles too, maybe. Just, I don't know if that's more likely to let the laser in or what.
I'm curious about that one because, I can understand the optical effect around the eclipse, right? Like, you've essentially got a magnifying glass. It's the same concept as, burning ants with a magnifying glass.
Right.
You're just focusing the sun onto a small point. What is it about lasers? Just they're super bright? They're not hot.
I mean, the acronym itself, light amplification from simulated emission of radiation. It's amplified light that is getting even more amplified by the optical elements in the lens.
Okay, so it is just like a brightness thing?
Yeah, and usually if you're watching laser lights at a concert or something, they're moving.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving pretty quickly. They don't stay in one spot too long. But if it flashes a direct hit on your sensor, it's enough to burn it. I'll give you a related part from my medical background because I've got a friend who's an ophthalmologist, and he said in young people, about every 2 or 3 months, he gets a patient in that he's doing a routine exam on, and he'll find a couple of burns in the retina of their eye.
Oh.
And he says, it's very noticeable. And the first thing I say is, you go clubbing a lot. And the people don't notice it. They don't realize that they've got this, 0.5 millimeter little pinhole in their retina that doesn't see anymore. But he notices when he examines their eyes. And he said it's interesting, but it's usually young people who go to concerts, go to clubs constantly. And I guess it's one of those things that with enough exposure, eventually some laser bit will get in your eye.
Let's say I am a concert photographer. Is there a way to avoid that? Or do you just cross your fingers?
I don't have experience in this area, but it would seem to me a cross your fingers thing.
Yeah, I like I said, mirrorless cameras seem to be the worst because the sensor's always exposed. DSLRs, I've never had an issue. I've shot a lot of concerts with DSLRs. I don't think I've ever actually seen a DSLR come back with a burned sensor. Maybe just shoot DSLRs.
That may be also that the people who are going to do concert photography are more likely to take small mirrorless gear where they can be out in the crowd or things too. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not common, but when you rent thousands of cameras a month, you see it every so often.
Yeah, we mostly see it on video cameras.
Yeah.
Just basically anything where the sensor remains exposed, I guess, is the idea. Like if you're shooting a DSLR, you've only got an exposed sensor while you're taking a photograph.
And I would guess with a lot of cameras these days that have mapping functions, people notice what they would call a hot spot. It's really a dead spot. They've mapped it out and they never think twice about it.
But if you're shooting an eclipse, you can avoid this. What are steps you can take to, not melt your sensor or melt the aperture in your lens if you need to shoot an eclipse?
Solar filters.
Yeah. And those aren't just like variable neutral density filters. Those are big metal kind of grid in glass filters that block out virtually 90% of the light or more.
Yeah, they're usually Mylar film or like coated glass of some sort.
And they're pricey.
Yeah, and I think we decided not to rent them.
Every 3 years, you rent them a lot, and then you don't anymore.
Yeah, we didn't rent them. We just pointed people to places to get them. I found some cheap Mylar ones that are fine for solar stuff that were big enough to fit our super tellies.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up. Thank you, Joey and Roger, for joining me and for telling me these very scary stories.
Spooky season.
I'm still waiting for my s'mores.
Thanks for listening to the Lensrentals podcast. If you have any gear horror stories of your own, email us at podcast@lensrentals.com. We'd love to collect enough listener stories to do another one of these next year. Happy Halloween, and remember, the best candy is Reese's Pumpkins, and it is not up for debate.
The Lensrentals podcast is a production of Lensrentals.com. If you've got a question or topic you'd like covered on the show, email us at podcast@lensrentals.com or leave us a voicemail at 901-609-LENS. That's 901-609-LENS. If you're enjoying the show, please review us on iTunes and subscribe in your podcast app of choice. Make sure to check the show notes for a link to this week's coupon code, and as always, Roger Cicala will leave you with an inspirational quote.
Are you some dark-winged messenger from beyond? Answer me, monster. Tell me truly. Shall I ever hold again that radiant maiden whom the angels call Lenore?
How the hell should I know? What am I, a fortune teller? Ooh, I'm chilled to the bones. Why don't you give me some wine?